Good evening, everyone. Today, we'll be reading from Ukraine, a history, and we'll be reading a small section called the Russophiles. In the 1860s, the interests and hopes of many educated Ukrainians focused on Russia. This was not surprising, for at the first time, various Slavic peoples such as the Czechs, Serbs, and Bulgarians, who were hard oppressed by Germans or Ottomans, also looked to their fellow Slavs, the Russians, for help. For its own purposes, Russia encouraged these Slavophile tendencies by establishing cultural contacts with and providing subsidies to these kindred peoples. One of the first and most avid Russian cultural missionaries was Mikhail Bogdan, a noted conservative historian who in 1835 visited Lviv and established contacts with the Ukrainian intelligentsia. At the time, much of his pro-Russian extortions had little impact. In the climate of the 1860s, they began to bear fruit. An early convert to Russophilism in Galicia was Danon Zubrydsky, a historian and one of the few Ukrainian noblemen. His efforts of those in the indefatigable Pugin helper attract other educated Ukrainians, most notably Ikiv Holotsky, one of the members of the Ruthenian Triad, to this tendency. However, the crucial breakthrough for Russophilium in Galicia came in the late 1860s when the so-called St. George Circle of the Greek Catholic dignities in Lviv espoused its tenets. Thereafter, Russophilium spread rapidly among the clergy. Indeed, until the end of the 19th century, the priests served its primary social base. With much of the Western Ukrainian elites at its adherents, the Russophile tendency began to play a major role in the cultural and political life of Eastern Galicia, Bukovina, and Transcarpathia. Russophilia was attracted to the old Ruthenians, not only because of the Slavophile propaganda and disenchantment with the Habsburgs, but also because the veterans of 1848 believed that they could only withstand Poles was to rely on Russia. Social psychology also played an important role. Even to the casual observer, it was evident that the Ukrainian clergy suffered an ethnic and social inferiority complex. Like every elite, it yearned for recognition and prestige. Yet Polish noblemen rarely failed to emphasize their social superiority over the Greek Catholic priests. Certainly, the peasant nature of Ukrainian society and culture did not provide vestige after the setbacks of the 1860s. Ukrainianism became even less appealing. Therefore, the identity to identify with the mighty Tsar and their fellow Russians, their flourishing culture addressed some of the clergy's deep-seated needs. The Russophilia of Ukrainians differed than that of the Czechs and the other Slavs, and that it went much further in addressing the similarity, even identicalness, of the Ukrainians and Russians. According to its leading propagandists such as Bohdan Didiatsky, Ivan Nomovich, Mikhailo Kakochovsky, and in Transcarpathia, Adolf Durbansky. The Ukrainians were part of the tripartite Russian nations with two other components of the Great Russians and the Belarusians. This first public statement on this view came in 1866, when Slovo, the newspaper of the old Ruthenian establishment, which was secretly subsidized by the Russian government, stated, "We can no longer separate ourselves by a Chinese wall from our brothers and reject the linguistic, literary, religious, ethnic ties that bind us with the entire Russian world. We are no longer Ruthenians of 1848, we are genuine Great Russians." By retreating completely from the positions of 1848, the old Ruthenians saw that they did not believe in their ability to stand on their own culturally, and even more so politically. A popular saying caught the essence of their position: "If we are to drown, we prefer to be in a Russian sea than to a Polish swamp." Another ramification to this attitude was the old Ruthenians, in placing all their hopes on Russian support, concluded that it was pointless to mobilize the Ukrainian masses. They were inherently just a lowbrow and passive people. But the old Ruthenians were not so bold to reject the Habsburgs openly. While stressing their cultural ties with Russia, they were careful to declare, in some Slovo article of 1866, "We are and have always been unwearying loyalty to our august Austrian monarch and our illustrious illustrious Habsburg dynasty, some of them notably higher clergy, helped even further, arguing that they are neither Russians or Ukrainians, but a simply Galician people. This odd self-perception, as well as a stress on localism, now into the powers and to identify with the mighty Russian Empire, while serving as a certain regional distinctions for themselves, was of course not a new phenomenon in Ukrainian history. Essentially, it was a West Ukrainian variant of the Malorussians, or Little Russians mentality, that was widespread in eastern Ukraine. Among Ukrainians, the impact of Russophilia was most clearly evident in the area of language. In line with their elitism, the old Ruthenians adamantly refused to use the vernacular of the swineherds and the shepherds and the peasants, which they saw the Ukrainian literary language as inherently lowbrow. So they chose the language of Great Russia. This unwieldy artificial linguistic amalgam, or Ijasi, as it was called, may have been prestige, but was also barely recognizable, especially into the peasantry. Even educated Ukrainians who wrote it according to their own Habsburg rules rarely spoke it, and preferring the use of Polish or Russian. It was no easy matter for the younger generation to bow to their well-established leaders. The Russophiles demanded that almost all Ukrainian institutions, the National Home and the well-endowed Stropnian Institute and the publishing house of Galician Ruthenian Matsia, as well as some of the press, including the largest newspaper, Slovo, were in their hands. In addition, in 1870s, the Russophiles founded a political organization, the Ruthenian Council, Ruska Rada, which they claimed was the direct continuer of the Supreme Ruthenian Council of 1848, and they intended to make it the sole representative of all Galicians and Ukrainians in Galicia and in Transcarpathia. Thus, even among its own elite, the Ukrainian movement had determined and a powerful movement.